And I think the future is in the present, and we have to start doing now. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I think what we're looking towards is radical system change. I think it's how do we hold tensions in ourselves to push tomorrow. And I think it is just getting on, stop worrying about being perfect.
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly. I think we talked earlier about not waiting for the perfect moment because, I mean, there isn't one. This is the transition. We're in the transition. We're seeing the transition happening. We've got to be part of that. I am really selfishly, I'm going to come to each of you, starting with you, Indy, and ask you a question that's reflective for us here at Best. Within some of the things that we've seen today, and I'm thinking of the demonstrators, the projects, and the programs, what role does an organisation like Best have? Like, how can we be, effective? More effective than we already are.
I wouldn't presume to be able to say that, but what I think is really important is that we have, my worry has been the conversation has been very layered. So people talk about, CO2 reduction, and we're going to and we're not thinking through the up and down side of the problem space. And we're not thinking through this in time. And one of the things that's really, the only reason I was trying to show the complete or quasi-completeness of the conversation, because it actually makes real material implications to what we're doing, how we're building our industries, how we're thinking about soil, how we're thinking about stuff. So one of the things would be just to take a real systems view of this transition and also take a time-based view. I think what we do in the next 5 years will be radically different to what we're doing in the next 10 years or 15 years. And we have to sequence this, availability of mineral sources and other things. So I think the comprehensiveness of the conversation is really critical. And actually starting to then, I think most of the analysts have been saying, we've got to be able to demonstrate these futures. And these are demonstrable transformations that we need to make. And this is part of a public conversation that's required in those frameworks. So I think the completeness of the conversation is really, really important. Because I think a lot of our conversations are slightly illusionary. They kind of sit in a kind of, wouldn't it be nice if we just had infinite timber supply? If we had infinite, we weren't going to get any food shops. Wouldn't it be nice?
I think you're right, and I think it really matters having that absolute clear picture, because otherwise you're just sort of talking around things, aren't you? When we have been coming back to this again and again, when I say we, it's me and Rachel again in the National Register Hub, we keep coming back to needing like that big picture of what we're talking about. Otherwise we're just over here doing a nice thing that could quite frankly just get wiped out at the next sort of oscillation as you were describing when we were talking about the kind of bumpy road ahead. So I do think that's really important. I also think it's a huge opportunity to actually have that clear picture to work towards. Otherwise, like, what are we doing? Rufus, I'll ask you the same question, just what kind of role can we play at Best?
So I draw an analogy. In the past, when you did software development, the software development team would go off into a dark room for several months and come back and go, ta-da, here's a product. And that has been completely superseded with an agile way of working. You make stuff, it breaks, you make it again, and you iterate. And we are stuck trying to design the perfect, sitting in rooms talking about the perfect solution and not doing anything. We need to move to an agile method of demonstrating. That might have looked like lots of slick, arrows and boxes and stuff. We know how half of that stuff works. We've got to get on and do it, work out which things don't work, do work. And so one of the key bits of glue of that is making sure that we're not making the same mistakes over and over again in different places. And so I think one of the things that Best does well and can do, needs to do more of, is that linking and that knowledge transfer. And when one person gets something right, everyone else benefits from that. And so we all move on in the quickest way possible.
I know Best possibly as well as any of the panel members, and I think Best superpower is this. I think it sits at the heart of an exceptional group of talent and network. And I agree, all the technology exists. Right? And I always describe it, 10 years ago, this was a jigsaw puzzle, all the pieces of the jigsaw were in the bag. 5 years ago, we got all the pieces of the jigsaw onto the table, some face down, some face up. I think we have the pieces of the jigsaw face up. And the people in this room, if we all harmonise and not polarise, can help to put that back together, and that's what best is to me, to the people.
Danielle said you need to collaborate to innovate, and I think that's one of the best mottos, and I think that's really resonated with me. I think in terms of next steps, we need to stand in the future and do that casting. If we want to create a city of the future, if we want to create a city that's restorative by intention and regenerative by design, how do we reach those critical masses that you've been outlining? Indeed, how do we create those financial support systems? And how do we create new energy ecologies to allow us to... And I think that's what's missing. I think at the moment we're really focused on what we need to do now, and at the moment in the council we're focused on 2030 and meeting those net zero targets. But really we should be doing that longer trajectory towards 2045. And actually, as you said, how do we get those regenerative systems in place? How do we create that balance? And how do we measure the trajectory as well? Big answer.
I'm going to actually, I know you started, but I'd like to hear from you as well. As somebody who's quite close to us.
Yes, as somebody who's quite close to us. I think it's the old evolutionary adage, and we need to move, adapt, or we will die. And I think our industry is at a really critical juncture of having to make this massive step change. And I think that can be a really scary thing. And I think one of the things that Best can do, and has done for me, is kind of take away those tears, take away that fear, and make it kind of like, okay, you can do this, take breaths. But I think it's about also, we need to empower people who are going to inherit the future. So, having things like change makers is brilliant, because we get to be in the spaces that influence. We get to kind of showcase the fact that construction is not just woody boots, but it's more, we're ecologists, we're graphic designers, we're creatives, we're so much more than, sites. So for me, it's about, having people that are the future and having that people-centric empowerment.
I'm going to come to you now. I'm sure after the breadth of people that you have heard from, there must be things. And I'm also going to say, if we can have some questions from people who maybe don't often get the chance to hold the mic, so maybe some more of the women and the younger people in the room as well, so let's make some space for a decent mix.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm working with Bell Group, who are a contractor based in Petrie, who at the moment are delivering about £60 million worth of retrofit projects across the UK. One of the things we really want to do, because I'm also helping Bell Group's movement towards net zero, is to buy products from Indy who are sitting outside. But at the minute, because of the cost curve, it's relatively more expensive than the oil and gas-based products. So when we talk to our clients, who are local authorities and housing associations, they say, oh, wait a minute, this is going to push the budget. But we're saying, look, this is not just zero carbon, Indy Nature is net carbon. So, specific question for Emma from Glasgow City Council. I'd just like to know that city councils are thinking about this, and maybe you could create a conversation with the other councils in the room, the housing associations, to say, are you ready to make that investment? Because it goes to the point that Indy was making about, and pretty much everybody else, it's a local product. It's made from farm products in the UK, and at the minute it's made in Jedburgh. So just a thought that I appreciate your views on that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, it's an interesting question. We have been looking at benefit in terms of tenement design and kind of looking over as colleagues, or not colleagues, but people who work with us, Rupert, I can see who's sitting in the audience there that was working on that project. And costs are slightly prohibitive at the moment. I think it was quite expensive. I'm not going to explicitly say what the costs are, Rupert, because I'll get it wrong. I know that. And I think that there's different costs that put forward for that project. But I think it's probably directing the question to Rupert as well, is that how do we then provide financial models to support retrofit at mass scale? And we are looking at whole street redesign or retrofit at the moment within the city. We've just got funding to do that. But it's not just, I would say, the cost barrier that's the problem. I think it's our legislative framework that's a barrier as well, because if you think about planning applications at the moment, they're just geared towards one house, whereas we do need to have whole street retrofit, and there's economies of scale within there as well. So how do we reinvent the system to benefit or create passive house developments at street scale but community scale? That's probably a question I'm going to pass the word to Rufus, I think.
Yeah, can I ask both of you actually to talk to this, because I think there's demonstrations arising out of this, both from the financial side and also the demonstrator neighbourhood side. So Rufus, if you want to, and then Morton.
Yeah, I think this is a good example of how our traditionally incremental approaches are failing. So we're used to changing things in our society through a nudge of policy and a carrot of maybe some sort of incentive, and seeing things shift. And we don't have the time for that, and it's not working. And so traditionally, new technologies would come out and they'd be expensive. The iPhone, when it first came out, was expensive, and Flash people bought them, and then as it came to mass market, it came down in price. I think we need a more orchestrated approach to do that when we know it's the right thing. I think there is a question of supply and demand. So a lot of the demand stimulation we've seen, things like the Green Home Grant, boiler upgrade grant, etc., create diffuse national demand. If you are a localized supply chain contractor, you don't care about diffuse national demand. You care about consistent long-term demand in your geographic area. And so the place-based model that I was talking about will create that demand, but alongside that, you then need to think about the skilling, the reskilling, and upskilling, but you also need to think about material supply chain. And one way you can accelerate new technologies is you subsidise them. It's effectively what happened with solar when solar first came in. And I think there's some thinking that needs to be done about how do we take a set of nascent, low-embodied carbon materials and allow them to scale, and do that alongside the demand piece, and the two are feeding off each other.
I think your point, as I understand it, is about procurement, and actually being outside the European single market does allow for us to deal with certain procurement issues. So one of the big challenges right now at the European free market level is that it's very difficult to buy local timber, because you definitely have the free market legislation that constrains the access to timber systems. So one of the big things that we have to think about is how do you drive actually bi-regional procurement capacity whilst keeping markets open in some format. And I think this is going to be a key issue in terms of how we do that, and how local authorities can play smart roles in building those procurement frameworks to deal with it. And this is, in a kind of corny sense, one of the advantages of Brexit is that we may be able to deal with actually being able to rebuild some local logistical infrastructure supply chains, which are going to be critical for this transition. And that requires not just procurement, but actually investment in new industrial development investment. So it requires investment in land use transitions, it requires a whole bunch of other stuff that needs to be actually worked simultaneously with those transitions. So procurement is one device, it's a suck device, but we also need the economic development infrastructure investment going on the other side. The unfortunate problem, I'm going to just state this, and maybe most local authorities, they're not picking Glasgow anyway, are basically, by 2027, all of their budgets are going to adult and social care. 2027, most local authorities run out of money. All the money is going to adult and social care, which means that there is one officer dealing with 10 investment projects, and Rufus made the point, there just isn't a systemic capacity I can say all this nice stuff, reinvent procurement, and when I do that, I know I'm going to have a legal question coming at me straight away from some of the incumbents. So this is not just that I reinvent procurement, I've got real legal risks that I have to manage, and I've got to be able to fight some cases in my background. So there are some structural issues that we need to get to, and I think this is what a new government or a fresh government in 2024 or maybe 2025 is going to have to look at. But without building the capacity, I think we're throttled literally in that space. That is where the throttle is. One policy officer trying to deal with 10 infrastructure scale investment projects doesn't have the capacity for all the will in the world. It's a really, real big bottleneck. So I want to marry the scale of your ambition. Your question is spot on, right? But it requires real structure working through all the way through that chain. And I just don't think we're understanding the bottleneck local authorities are facing in terms of having the capacity to deal with that. And we need them to act as lead market makers for this transition, because they are orchestrators at the place level, as Rufus was rightly saying.
It's such a great question. I think we could probably, I have some questions that I'd like to go into off of that, but I think what we'll do instead to encourage some more is another question. If there's a question from a female voice, that would be great. There's a person up here in front.
Should be on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I work for the Health and Safety Executive for the UK government. I'm particularly interested in the skills gaps and ensuring that we have a workforce that can implement new methods of construction in a safe way that also doesn't damage their health, which is devolved to the Scottish Government in that sense, and relate that to the procurement process and what the panel thinks would be the best lever within, particularly government procurement, to fulfil those skills that they're going to need.
Thank you. I'm actually glad you mentioned that, like the levers that people have. There was a question that I would have asked you, Steve, if we had more time, about if you want to maybe answer that, but thinking about the leverage that you have as an organisation in response to that.
Yeah, I think the skills shortage is critical, and we had this discussion yesterday with the Minister. Public procurement's got a big part to play in helping readdress the skills gap, and it's not. There's a linkage to the previous question. That there needs to be, and it's difficult, as Indy said, there needs to be a public procurement review in terms of best value and outcomes. And having a proper ecosystem that is all connected, and it's not at the moment. And we've still got local authorities. I'm not picking on local authorities. We've still got public sector organisations procuring at lowest cost. We have still got construction projects being done where there are no skills created in the local community. Even when it's a contractual requirement, I'm not sure it's policed or enforced to make sure. So if we can get that right, there is 50% of new infrastructure would immediately start to benefit, from the creation of skills. I also think that a lot of companies, I'm involved in the apprenticeship advisory board, I speak to a lot of other organisations, big companies and SMEs and medium-sized companies, etc. A lot of companies are investing in skills and apprentices significantly, and we're taking on, our commitment is an apprentice every day for this decade. But a lot of companies aren't, and one of the reasons I think they aren't is they don't know how to, or it's too complicated, or they can't be bothered, or they're too busy, etc. So we need to make the system simpler, easier to navigate, and I think we also need to have a look at the spend for education. The total spend for education in Scotland between universities and colleges, because at the moment we are overqualifying, in my opinion, too many people. People are leaving university with degrees that aren't attractive to employers, and they're not sure what they're going to do, and they end up just taking a job that the degree actually doesn't suit. So the more we can do, this is all of us, this is not a government problem, it's all of us collectively. It's employers, it's the government, it's the agencies. We need to make sure that we are creating the intelligence and the skills, and the professional skills and vocational skills that we need as a society. But there is still a rush to university, which is partly social, which is partly traditional, since the the 1980s, schools have been pointing young people at university, as have the parents. There's been a bit of a stigma around apprenticeships evolved recently. We need to kill that, because an apprentice and a graduate in any company worth its salt are equal. They have equal opportunities. They just have different skills and they just have different qualifications. So I think employers have got a big part to play as well as the government, as well as procurement. I think employers have got a part to play as well, and it will never be good enough. And that's why I go on and on and on and on, ask anybody about this all the time. We all have a part to play in increasing the numbers of people and the skills that they have.
I suppose some of the, we're coming back to always needing really systemic structural alterations and changes and really big, bold moves for that. And whilst we might all, from having been immersed in this morning, be quite open to that, I think when you go away, the power of business as usual can really drag you back in, and also it's more comfortable, it's not as scary, it's not, just try so hard, that can happen. I just wanted to come to you on about the kind of the storytelling element of it and the importance of hearing this on repeat again and again and again and again. And I know, having spoken to what you just said, Steve, about being like, oh, I'm always about this. And I know I've heard Indy and Rufus talk over and over and over again about this thing, but it is important, isn't it, for us to do that and find new ways to communicate. Can we talk about the importance of that messaging and speaking to the person?
Yes. So I think if I'm to think about our industry and think about the built environment, we tell our story so badly. I think we deserve to tell our story and get our brand to be where it needs to be, and it deserves to be so much better. And I think it's a really complicated thing when you're thinking about how do you connect with different individuals, how do you connect with some different sects of people. And I think a lot of the work with change makers is we focus on that community level, and how do you empower people at the community sort of scale. How do you look at people as people? And I think, going back to the point about skills, completely agree about the, kind of race to the bottom approach, and it's not really nurturing skills or the investment in it. But I think, we need to see skills and the skills crisis not just as creating people in a pipeline of talent, but looking at something, that we call retro-skilling. So how do we look at not just defining someone's occupation by the skills that they have, but the skills that they can transfer to the industry? How do we make it accessible and safe and inclusive and brave for them to come into it? It's attractive. And I think, communication, it's a really interesting one. I think we're good at talking. I think we're good at using kind of high-level, jargon. I think we need to simplify the message down. I think we need to have more people at the table. I think the messaging needs to be a lot bolder.
Definitely bold today, that wasn't. Okay, we're going to take a final question. I'm not even looking because I can see people that I know and they're all going, me, can I ask the question? So wherever the mic ends up, that's where the question's going. It's over to you, Kirsty. It's so hard. You want to get everybody's questions in.
Hello, good afternoon panel. My name is Maura Gangus and I'm Head of Construction and Property for Scottish Government. The questions that you have been debating today are incredibly important, and I'm very interested in a lot of the themes that you have brought out. I have two specific questions, but before that, if you'll indulge me a moment, I'd just like to talk about some collaborative work for transformative change which is happening right now. And Anna knows about this because she's a member of our Transformation Action Board. We're working with the Scottish Construction Leadership Forum. We developed a construction accord which was signed and launched just over a year ago. And over this last year we've had 10 working groups involving over 40 representatives from the construction sector, private sector companies, 39 public sector organisations involved from the buying side and also the policy side. And we've developed a whole series of plans which attach to the outcomes that the construction accord was aiming to deliver. And that's about having a thriving and modern construction sector for Scotland to deliver the net zero work that we know needs to happen. So that Transformation Action Plan was launched this morning at 8:30. So my shameless plug is, please will you go and have a look at our website, and if you've got a point of view, if you've got a question about procurement reform, if you've got an interest or a skill, comment on our consultation, Come and join us. You have the opportunity to make change happen if you get involved. My specific questions are one for Steve and one for Rufus, please. Steve, in other countries there are models where the energy companies provide the carbon efficient equipment to householders and it's then rented so that the individual doesn't have the affordability gap. And I'm very, interested in how to make things affordable for people to do the things they want to do. And then the second question involves that same concept, Rufus, which is, I love your model and I'd like to hear more about it, but can you explain to us how you secure the debt if there's nothing attaching to an individual or a property? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, energy as or heat as a service, energy as a service is a really interesting model. And as we all know, energy suppliers and companies work within a regulated framework, but we are actively, looking and thinking about how can we and could we provide energy as a service, and it's not straightforward, but it is something I think that will come over the years.
How do you secure the debt? The flippant answer is you don't. So when you have solutions that are designed by funders, they minimise their risk. And so you come up with PACE, energy strong, debt-related products, because if you've got asset security on your loan, you feel happier lending money. The problem with that is a large portion of the population don't have the credit to borrow money, and we need a solution for everyone, not just for the wealthier. And secondly, all the people who do have that credit capacity, people don't like being in debt. There's a human psychology issue of a debt-based product doesn't work. So one of our kind of assumptions, or one of our inputs into the sort of homework question of trying to develop the model was you can't have debt. So it's debt to the funding vehicle, but it's not debt to the individual. There is a payment obligation on the individual, and that would have to survive change of tenure, change of ownership. But when you move into a house, you pay council tax. You don't have a debt associated with that council tax. So it's a concept that isn't necessarily that unusual. And you have to factor the risk in. So how you collect that fee is important. So we have proposed, but it's just a proposal that sits on the utility bill. And then you're taking on utility credit risk, which is a very well-known risk. You can factor that into the model. You can look at, there are some emerging insurance products starting to come out, looking at outcome of retrofit and outcome of energy systems. And ultimately, it might be one way that the national balance sheet supports this is looking at guarantee potentially. But you don't, is the answer. We can't have a debt-based process.
I think the interesting thing about your question, it involves absolutely both, as you know, and it's a rethinking of how we pay for energy, how we fund and finance things. And one thing, the point of detail that came to my mind as Rufus was talking, but I wasn't listening, I hasten to add, is that the grant system that we have for heat pumps currently goes to the owner of the heat pump, which is the householder. That would constrain the energy supplier as providing heat. So if we said, we're going to provide 21 degrees in the lounge, 17 in the hall, 16 in the bedrooms, an external ambient temperature of -5, and the cost is X pounds per month. And the customer would be agnostic as to whether, which type of heat pump it was, because it would be part of the service. We would all, for the first time, have to work together to create that situation. And that's why I love Indy's way. It's entangled, all of these, we have to unpick all of this and put it back together again. Really interesting.
I'd love this conversation between Steve and yourself.
Is it? Mike's just gone. Indy's mic is just gone. It's going to come next to you. We have to. I don't want to stand next to him.
The solution space I'm really interested in is the energy meter. I'm putting a lien against the energy meter, and actually as a unit, so that allows the household to be able to still pick new energy providers, but you put a lien on the capital investments against the energy meter in conditionality of the unit cost of energy. And if you make the energy meter a self-sovereign product, as in not owned by the energy companies themselves, that becomes your mechanism to deal with it legally. And that's a space we're looking at to be able to actually deal with that problem. So it'd be really interesting to kind of see how we could actually take that unit, and you can then deal with all sorts of possibilities as a result of that, legally putting it on the energy meter.
Let's do that. Another interesting factor here is...
We've really got Petrie here. Okay, last comments.
Is the uptake of smart meters.
Yeah.
We have to get that fixed as a nation.
I just have to say this is exactly what I hoped would happen, where people are like, oh yeah, let's, right, after this, and we'll have this conversation and we will like unlock all of these things. So, we just want to say a huge thank you to our panelists.